Vella Panti, an online house party for people with disabilities, every Saturday, April 2020. Session 4, April 25, 2020. A conversation on mental health and psychosocial disabilities.
I would welcoming all of you to the call. Thank you so much for joining us in our last session of Vellapanti. This session, in the previous sessions, we spoke a lot about relationships and love, consent, etc., body shaming, and we begin this conversation with mental health and how important it is in these times, especially for people with disabilities, but in general talking about mental health and how we are coping is something that we felt was very important. We have some lovely videos for you, as well as a couple of really good panelists, Val Resh and Meghana. They will introduce themselves or once we finish watching the videos. So first we will watch the videos. Can I please request Arjita to play the videos? If you're having any trouble navigating the screens, you can leave private messages for Chenika, Srinidhi, or Rising Flame. These are all team members of Rising Flame. So you can leave us all private messages and we will help assist you in the.
Click on the link in the description box below to watch the TEDx talk titled Madness, The World Has It All Wrong by Val Resh.
Thank you so much, Arjita. Hi, folks. Hi, everyone. This is Nidhi Goel, the founder and executive director of Rising Flame. Sorry for the couple of seconds of lag. Since I live with blindness, it wasn't immediately evident for me that the video ended. And I, as a friend of Resh, as a colleague of Resh, I always want to hear more from her. And so the expectation was that the video would go on for a couple of minutes more. But the fantastic thing is that we do have Val Resh with us here. Yes, she is Reshma Valiappan and she likes to be called Val Resh. I'm not just making it up. She really calls herself Val Resh. So Val Resh, welcome to this call and thank you so much for joining us. You're an activist, you're an artist. I also liked many other descriptions that you gave of yourself in the video. I really want to know about the part-time lover, but this is not maybe a great space to ask about that. But I really like that description. And I really actually fell in love with your imaginary friend, the way they spoke to you. And I really wished at some point, when I was listening to this video before and even now before we chose it for this session, I was just like, wow, hey, if I had friends like that, life would be, I mean, I have wonderful friends, no offense to them, but I was like, if I had friends like this, it would be amazing, wouldn't it? And so tell me more, Resh, if we can start, I'll throw a couple of questions at you, and then we'll also open up simultaneously for audience to ask questions. So people, can you please keep typing in your questions? And I'll be able to hear it, or Resh will be able to see it. We complement each other that way. And so, Resh, to start with, tell me why this description of, people get really uncomfortable when you call yourself an alien from another planet. I know this is not what we discussed, but I can't help asking you, is that a feeling that others give you even more? Where did this first start, calling yourself an alien from another planet? I mean, I would love metaphysics, and I would definitely ask me more about your planet, but that's for me.
Yeah, am I audible, Nidhi?
Absolutely.
All
clear.
Right. So I started calling myself an alien from another planet sometime around 2010. Before that, I used to call myself a vampire from another planet, but nevertheless another planet, because when you have a condition such as schizophrenia, you're automatically made to feel that you don't belong on this planet, the least of all in the same society and the least of all in the same setting. You're automatically outcasted in itself. You have laws that also suggestive that you don't, you're not the same as everybody else. You have a whole group of individuals who are authority figures who say that you're not normal. and therefore you actually need to be fixed. And this automatically separates me from the rest of what is known as society, right? This society that I'm actually supposed to be a part of. So when somebody tells me that I'm not normal and the only way I can be a part of this world is to be like them, and that's where it starts from, this feeling, or this feeling of being alienated almost every single time. And that alienation does not just happen to me as an individual, it also happens to the family, because something like schizophrenia doesn't just affect you, it also affects the family members and the family around you who chooses to support you. They as a group also start being alienated.
Thank you, Resh. I think that's really honest and really tough. And as people with disabilities, we always face that. I mean, in some form or the other. And within disabilities, psychosocial disability, intellectual disabilities, developmental disabilities, people living with all of these conditions face it even more, because it's like further stigma. So I want to really come to, and you said you don't feel, because society doesn't make you feel normal, and there is a normal. I feel normal is overrated. That's just me. It'll really help if you shared a little more about what this real normal is, right? And I know you speak in the video about everybody dreams, and everybody wants their dreams to come true, but you dream with open eyes. And I really think, that really, for me, that's self-explanatory, right? That's like, oh yeah, but that's normal, right? So why are we this whole sort of, I don't, maybe I should call it the obsession with normal, right? And this whole stigma of not being normal. Can you unpack that a little more as a woman, as a person with psychosocial disability, just around this whole normal and the stigma around psychosocial disability? A little more.
Well, between you and me, hearing voices is very normal, right?
I would love if the voices were sexy and sexier.
Yeah, so for everybody else who's listening, for Nidhi, of course, you have to hear voices, Nidhi. If you don't hear voices, you can't access the world.
Correct.
Right? So, and for me, just because I can see does not mean that I don't want to hear voices. In fact, this idea of normal that started when you have to fit into the world, it came from how psychiatrists or psychologists started viewing schizophrenia. They wanted to get, the minute you tell them you still hear voices, it makes them feel scared. They're like, oh, Resh is back to hearing her voices and talking to her friends, which means either she's gone off her medications, the medications are not working, we need to relook it. And for me, not having my friends, my imaginary friends, or the voices in my head, or the people I see, started making me feel less of a human. It was important for me to actually hear them. And for them to just, when people told me that you can't hear them, I mean, if you start hearing them, it means you're having a relapse. That hit me a lot more harder than anything else. That's one part of what this normalcy debate has always been. I think it's only much, much recently that the user survivors movement, when I'm saying user survivors, you're talking about people with lived experiences of mental illness per se, what is known as high spectrum mental illness, who have been advocating for their stories and even challenging how living with schizophrenia can be, and how sometimes it's okay for us to actually live with the voices in our head or with what we see. You're also talking about normalcy in terms of different cultures. A lot of research has looked into how Western societies or individuals from the Western society, the Western world, experience voice hearing, and how it is different than individuals in maybe southern countries like South America, India, these areas. And this is an actual interview done. And the question was asked as to, they found an interesting they found an interesting difference. They said that people in the southern worlds, including women, said that it's okay if I heard voices. Sometimes they're negative, sometimes they're positive. And in the Western world, in fact, whether they were negative or positive, the individuals said that I just simply don't want them. And again, the question was thrown across, why? Why was that response? And that response really came from our cultures. You see, as an Indian woman, Nidhi, we're always being told what to do. Okay, it does not matter whether you're blind or whether you have schizophrenia or whether you're the so-called normal woman. And we are always being told what to do, whether you're 6, 16, 36, 60. There's always going to be someone telling you, I don't think that's how it is. You should try that. But the same thing
That's
does
true.
not.
Sorry. I have some really bad jokes on this, but go on. I'll crack them at the end.
Yeah, I'm trying to not crack my jokes, but yeah. So, and then when you look at our counterparts or our so-called equal, which is men with disabilities and men with psychosocial disabilities, of course, they also experience the same level of suffering and rejection as us. There's always going to be this one point of patriarchy, if I can use that term, that does apply differently to women, especially. This normal as a woman, can I throw that table and smash it? Will it be allowed? Is it something normal? Or do I need to have a penis in between my leg and have a beard and come across as a man? And if I throw that table, wow, that's some biceps you have. I mean,
Okay. Okay, Resh. I
sorry.
want to ask you, I want to take this thought forward and ask you to expand it a little more about being told what to do, right? And I fully agree that women in India are told, and many women, the good women, quote unquote, not us, because we don't listen to when we're told. I wish. I mean, people around me would be so much happier if I just heard everything that they said. But that would mean that I wouldn't be an activist. I wouldn't be independent. I wouldn't be living, right? Because there's so
True.
much told to us constantly. And this, what you're saying, that told to you around that you're not normal, so you just don't have the right of anything that belongs to quote unquote normal people. I think that also has two layers around infantilization of people with disabilities and this gender patriarchy, which means that men have different liberties than women in a very binary sense. I'm not even complicating it more, right? I feel like if we take this told what to do and the agency and the lack of agency and autonomy that women with disabilities and women with psychosocial disabilities in particular have, how's that even different from women with other disabilities? Can you just elaborate a little more on that? Because I think it's very important for us to point at the elephant in the room. All women with disabilities are not the same. All people with disabilities are not the same. We always say it's not a homogeneous group, but what we don't say is it's just that how much lesser privileged or how much more marginalized or how many how much of lack the lack of autonomy and agency is so much more for women with psychosocial disabilities. So if you could just share a little more about that and your thoughts on it.
Well, speaking of the elephant in the room, a friend just told me about positive thinking, and I wish like positive thinking could remove my schizophrenia, but it doesn't. I mean, if I could suggest positive thinking to Nidhi Goyal, who's blind, would it remove your blindness? That's something that just struck me very recently, that it's because a lot of people cannot see what is this mental illness or this psychosocial disability that we're talking about. There are so many gray factors and gray matters involved. But just going from the social construction here is the difference between somebody with psychosocial disability and somebody with a physical disability is somebody with a physical disability can still somehow access the outside world. They might not perhaps have a ramp for their wheelchairs, of course. They might not have tactile for somebody who's, blind to touch and move across. They might not have a sign interpreter for somebody who's deaf, but they can still walk out that room. They might break a leg, they might, get themselves hurt. They can still walk outside of that room. When you're talking about women with disabilities, majority of them are living in institutions. Some are locked up in their own homes. Some are locked up into their own minds and their own rooms, and they refuse to even come out. So that accessibility still doesn't exist in terms of just getting out there and learning about the world. How is that further different in infantilizing or having come across as being childlike? Somebody with a physical disability who, despite not having the accessibilities given to them when they can access the world, it means they can still exist in the world and understand what is it they don't have, what is it they can get. That's what it means. But if you have been locked inside for years together, you don't even know what is it that you want. Least of all, understand what is it that you can get and who to ask it from. And this COVID-19 that we're all talking about, when I see a lot of people talking about being locked inside and they can't take it for even like 2 weeks. I don't want to sound boastful when I'm saying this, but it's something a lot of my friends have been going through for 25 years of their life. They've just been locked inside. COVID or no COVID, they're still locked inside. That pandemic struck them a long time back.
I don't know what to say, Resh, because it's really true, right? You're stripped of all your agency or of all your rights, right? Like this whole mobility, access, freedom of speech, everything that we're so proud of all the time. And the discussion around it, particularly in this current moment, is that, we're all struggling. It's impacting our mental health. We're locked up at homes. Yes. So I was having this conversation with somebody. They were like, of course we are safe. I said, do you have enough supplies? They're like, of course we have enough supplies. And everything. So, I mean, whatever check boxes you could do for basic necessities. Do you have an air condition? Of course I have. Do you have a digital connection? Of course I have. I said, then what's the problem? They're like, no, but we are locked up. It's impacting our mental health. And I said, yeah, and you think it's great to lock someone with a psychosocial disability, and that would not further exaggerate the conditions. How's that even considered as a treatment, as a measure, when we know that denying access, barring that way, really restricting, constraining, controlling, really has negative impacts. So I'm really grateful that you brought this point forward. We do have a couple of questions coming forth, Resh, but if you had to, and there's a lot to your story, we can go on talking for another hour, 2 hours, about, your life, your experiences as an activist, as a woman with a psychosocial disability, etc. But I think if you had to start, if you had to give one message around how should people approach, even challenge themselves, or approach the issue of psychosocial disability, right? What would you even tell them? Where is the starting point? Because this is a great starting point for me to think about, hey, it's not just, try hard enough. I won't start seeing if I try hard enough, right? I mean, although people have said that I'm not taking enough measures. If I went to the right doctor, I'll start seeing. I still meet at least 5 such people in 6 months or a year. But that apart, where should one even start self-reflection or challenging oneself from within to just understand and build empathy around mental health and psychosocial disability?
Well, I will answer you exactly like what Jake would answer. It starts from within. You can only empathize with another human being if you're willing to empathize with yourself. And that we find in how children are able to do it very easily. can we ask for help ourselves before wanting to provide it to somebody else, right? There's a saying that the helper can only help if they are already having help.
Right.
They have to
Right.
take care of themselves also. And in order for you to take care of yourself, it means you have to be open to actually saying, I'm as much human as you are, and I go through shit. And sometimes I'm up and sometimes I'm down, and that's also okay. Sometimes I collapse and I stay there, and it's okay. Leave me there. You don't have to do anything. Just be there with me. In a more friendly way, I would say, if girls are having a pajama party and one of us gets drunk and starts talking shit, what do? Do we try to fix them, or do we also start joining in and maybe talking shit or just watching them and laughing? There's a sense of being that can exist whether you have any disability or anything. And I think it just from all of us, actually. That's the message in the work I'm also doing with the Red Door, the same thing that my members of the Red Door also feel. We really need to drop this ego that holds us back from asking help ourselves. Because when you can tell me that, hey, Resh, I also have issues, maybe not as much as yours, but I've gone through something like this. It makes me feel that you're also human. And that's the starting point, that we're all prone to shit.
Thank you, Resh. I think self-acceptance, many of us don't want to start from the point that we're all prone to shit and we could be in this situation or we experience something. I think often we're not brave enough to face our own selves as well. This is what happens many a times. So thank you for bringing that. And of course, Resh, I'd like to apologize profusely that I didn't mention Red Door before. Resh is the founder of Red Door, and Red Door does some fabulous work. And we'll close with Resh telling us a little bit of Red Door's work around mental health, around communities, etc. But I want to go to two comments, I think, that have come in. Srinidhi, I've read them, but I think reading them loudly for Resh would be great, since Resh loves the voices. Srinidhi, can I please request you to read Smita's question and Swati's comment, if I'm not wrong, and if there are any other that I've missed.
There is Samia's comment as well. That's a question. She's been a psychology student herself. However, I couldn't understand one thing. When someone uses spectacles, then he or she is not labeled as ill. That's the first one. Second one is from Smita. Hi Resh, Smita here. Have you come across a person with trichotillomania? I recently came across a person who's struggling between the normalcy and psychosocial issues and is a client of mental health system for years, but hesitates to identify as a person with psychosocial disability. Any advice as to how this person should deal with the condition? And the last comment is from Swati, which says, for 10 years, I could go out only once a year. After I did access a ramp, car, and go out once a week. But I feel more isolated now among people than before.
Thank you so much, Srinidhi. I think, Resh, if you want to club those and really, from Smita's question, also respond to more around this whole gap between mental health and psychosocial disability, and the two terminologies and identifying oneself within these two groups. And Trinity, that was a trick thing so that you could pronounce trichotillomania for me before I mispronounced it. So thank you so much for reading the questions. Resh, over to you.
All right. So first I will just, Sanya's comment was, when someone uses spectacles, then she or he is not labeled as ill. Nidhi, I'm going to give you that question, in fact. But taking on to Smita's question, hey Smita, yes, I have come across somebody with trichotillomania and having mental illness back in 2003, actually a very good friend of mine, who has been inside the system for a long time. This is not a question I can actually address in totality over here. We might have to probably get on a conversation for this. But there are a couple of things that one always has to work with. Is it necessary for the person to identify as having psychosocial disability? Identity plays a huge role for all of us. Maybe the person does not want to identify having psychosocial disability. They just want to identify with whatever they want to identify. And we have to work with this terminology and them, right? That's, I think, the starting point of it. When you just get a person and when you get working with the person and what they claim to be their identity, that's where the starting point of how you can advise or suggest them to deal with the condition begins. I hope that helps for now. If you have further questions, of course, you know how to reach me, Smita. I think Swati's is a comment and not a question. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Resh. I think Swati is adding to our conversation around how people with disabilities or women with disabilities anyway face lockdown in so many other ways and isolation in so many other ways. So she's just highlighting that fact through her journey. And when they're just to come to the first one around when people have glasses, they're not judged or they're not called disabled. I think it's really the gender lens there. In a lot of communities in India, just having glasses or having spectacles is also counted against you, right? It's really that whole idea of perfection, and which Resh was bringing, that for women, the pressures are even more. It's just that, you're short, you're tall, you're fat, you're thin, you're dark. Oh, you're disabled. Oh, you have spectacles. Okay, you're not yet disabled. Oh, you're mad. And these are really literally the terms that are used. You're blind. Oh, why would you do this? Why would you not behave a certain way? So then everything gives you marks, and the totaled up marks are the marks that society then decides whether you're woman enough or not, right? So if you're dark, fat, short, and blind, oh my God, you're finished. You're not even you're not the W of women as well, right? So it's just, it goes on and on and on, and it builds like that. So it's not really, I don't know what else to respond, but really when I say even amongst disabilities and as a disabled woman myself, I want to say conversations around mental health and psychosocial disabilities are not proactively participated in or empathized with. And if you go further, conversations around intellectual developmental disabilities are one that people don't even probably empathize, don't even want to, because they're like, yeah, of course they shouldn't have rights. They're not fully adults. And these are some of the conversations that happen even with people with psychosocial disability. We're like, oh, but how will you take a decision? It is money decision, but money decision even I may not take because I'm not a financial expert, right? I may go to a financial expert. But the idea that if you're disabled and if you live with psychosocial disability, which Resh was saying, and then you are stripped, the laws are made actively, Resh, to prevent people with psychosocial disabilities. For a very long time, the divorce laws, on grounds of unsoundness of mind, you could just be divorced, right? Like then there was no problem. Yeah, like, "Arey, ye pagal hai, isko divorce de sakte hai." So she's not even fit for being. There's so many underlying messages that we constantly legally, socially give people with psychosocial disabilities, and that's why people who speak out are so important, and we need to listen to them. It's so important to not just speak out, and it's not easy. So we do, it's Resh has been doing this for many years, but I do want to again say, Resh, I think it's incredible the work you do and the way you take your activism forward. And it's not always easy to be in spaces to always talk about psychosocial disability, and to always go and say, "Arey Baba, it's normal, it's okay, let's not talk about normal." And it could be fatiguing, but you always power on. And I think we have one more question, Resh. After you respond to that question, can I please ask you to tell us in brief the work that Red Door does, because you're doing some fabulous work there.
Sure.
Huti, I think, had a question, shouldn't we?
Is there a question somewhere?
Sorry, I've been talking with the mute button on. Hello, Reshma. Pleased to listen to you again, as I have already listened to you in an interview video conducted by Hemchandra Kara, MOOC on disability studies. That's all. It's just a comment. It's not really a...
Okay. Do you remember this interview, Reshma? You've
Yes,
been
I
giving so
do.
many. Oh, you do. Okay.
I do.
I was just like, Reshma, please.
I do too many interviews, but yeah.
Great. Okay, Resh. Can I please ask
So
you to
to
just through Red
respond,
Door how? Yeah.
yeah. So in short, the Red Door currently has the Red Door has always believed that creativity works when you're dealing with a mental health issue. But then it went on further to any health issue because with my schizophrenia, I also went through a craniotomy for a brain tumor. And I realized that just having creativity as a tool, and creativity can mean a lot of things, not just a paintbrush, not just acting, stand-up comedy, which is what you do, Nidhi, drama. It could be creative thinking for that matter, playing really helps you kind of just be. It need not have an end point that I must create a beautiful painting or I need to show this to the world, that I must post every day, which stresses somebody like me out even more. That's the bottom line of the Red Door, that each one of us is unique, and each one of us is actually mad or normal in our own ways, and that's what makes us unique. um, so our work is divided between two events right now. One is we work with, we've been teaching a program called the Peaceful Warrior Changemaker in two Akansha Foundation schools in Pune. And the other event is in Delhi, which is led by my co-founder, Aparna Sanyal. It's called Catharsis, and Catharsis is a wordplay between Katha and Catharsis. Katha as in K for story, and that when you tell your stories, it's just healing in itself. That's the work going on both sides. With Peaceful Warrior, it's more in detail. That's where I'm an educator. I teach. Red Door is an actual syllabus, a lesson plan in school, like how kids have to learn history, geography, sports, art, drama. They also have the Red Door on their timetable, and they have to learn what it is. And it's a lot of what we call as social emotional intelligence. But my kids would probably tell you it has got to do with ladki ko kaise patane ka.
Arey
or
wah.
or ladke
I
ko
don't.
kaise patane ka. So
I
that's,
was just coming to that, Resh. I was like, I'm really offended, Resh. What is this?
but
Can I
how
have
do
those
you react?
private lessons? Do you like email them as well, or like leave voice notes, or
I'll leave you
लड़के को
voice
कैसे
notes.
पहचाने? Please leave me voice notes. So those who don't understand Hindi, what Resh basically said is, how do you get yourself a date? It's more concrete than just a date.
Yeah, how do you ask a girl out, or how do you ask a boy out? But
And versions of that.
yeah,
How do you?
and
Yeah.
also, I mean, it just basically teaches them consent, desire. It really started with actually addressing. This was in 2015. I will not go on. I'll just like finish this in a minute. Uh, the Nirbhaya case was around, and the school was going through a lot of issues where there was sexual assault and sexual violence, to the point where it came up to the teachers, and it red flagged her when she heard a boy telling a girl, I'm going to stick a ruler up your vagina. And they started realizing what were all the issues there. So that's when I was called in to work with them. And that's what the Peaceful Warrior Changemaker program is about. It looks at mental health, addressing mental health without really talking about the conventional ways of mental health. But a lot of our stress, trauma comes from when we were kids. And we believe that that's how early intervention programs perhaps should be. You just give the kids these tools that empowers them, both boys and girls, at a very early stage, that tomorrow they can actually reach out to somebody else when they know they need help. Just that, even for boys, because boys and men are told that they cannot cry, and if asking help makes them look weak. And
Right.
that's also applicable to women, actually. Asking help makes you look weak.
Right.
So
But
yeah, at
I
that.
think this is amazing. Resh, just, jokes apart, Peaceful Warriors is always, every time you tell me, it reinforces how, how we don't think about early intervention in certain ways, how art can be used so effectively. It's just all of that coming together, how conversations are important. Um, just learning at that age, building the concepts of everything like respect, consent, empathy are extremely important. And I've had the honor of speaking at Catharsis, and it's a fabulous experience. Stories do heal, and I think I spoke out about certain things that I don't think I've ever spoken out on camera. So it's just both your programs are amazing, and can I? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So I just want to say thank you so much, Resh, for sharing all of this with us. And if you have a couple of minutes more, can you please just stay around and just stay on for the call if people have more questions. Some of them do have, someone's asked you opinion on love and disability. And I definitely wanted to ask you about part-time lover, but I think we'll have to move, we'll have to move on. And before I get into totally inappropriate stand-up comedy content, let me move on to the next segment. But
Sure.
thanking you profusely on behalf of the entire team and all our listeners. On the call and on Facebook. And if there are any questions on coming up on Facebook, Chenika, please feel free to write it here. Chenika from our team is coordinating the Facebook Live. Thank you, Resh,
Yep.
and thank you for your incredible journey and work. And it's really always a pleasure listening to you. And I'm sure we never do justice. We never have time enough to hear. I have so many more questions about you navigating the digital world, the kind of trolling, the kind of backlash, pushback. But I think those conversations might have to wait for a bit as we move into the next segment. It's continuation of mental health and psychosocial disabilities, as we said. And we've intentionally used both words because, as you heard in one of the questions, people do it's the whole concept of self-identification, and we do not want to we do want to respect that. So the whole spectrum around mental health, psychosocial disabilities is something that we wanted to take some bits of it and have conversations. So we will be watching a next TED Talk, and I'll request Arjita to stop at about 8 minutes because we're late. We'll run out of time otherwise. It's a TED Talk. You'll hear by whom, etc., but it is a TED Talk, TEDx Talk on depression.
Click on the link in the description box below to watch the TED Talk titled Confessions of a Depressed Comic by Kevin Briel.
Hi, sorry we had to stop the audio here or the video talk here. We just like to invite Meghna, therapist from Kaha Mind. Thank you so much, Meghna, for joining us. And sorry again that we're a little delayed on the segment, but I think it was just such interesting conversations with Resh, and we're hoping to have a great conversation unpacking some of the things that we heard on the video with you as well.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for having me, Nidhi. Yeah.
Thank you, Meghna, for joining us. I want to first start with if the video has triggered anyone, please feel free to reach out to us. I'm sure we'll also be able to connect you to Meghna or her team at Kaha Mind. Just want to acknowledge and take that pause and say it may be hard for many individuals to hear this, to go through the video, to have the following conversation. So if anybody feels too triggered, would want to leave the call at any time, please feel free to do so as well. And if you need more help and support, please do get in touch with any of us on Rising Flame through our social media, through our emails. I'm happy to connect you also to therapists and counselors if that's needed. Okay, Meghna, I just wanted to welcome you and really first open up, which I forgot to do with Resh, just around your thoughts with the on the video on just this overall, since you work so closely with depression as a therapist. um he's raised some very critical and important points, one of them being there's a difference between sadness and depression, and I'd like you to come to
Yeah.
that. But this whole feeling of what depression is, because it's really, I mean, it's, even though it's talked about quite a bit in India right now, by many well-known people,
Yes.
I don't know how much it's a common household conversation, right?
Right.
Like flu is, headache is, fracture is, but depression is not. So, and really this whole idea about what depression, because he keeps saying real depression, right? So I also wonder if we have something like a real depression, and what does that mean? Because for many of us, what we go through is real. So it's just with some of those thoughts, if you could start the conversation, please.
Right. So, well, hi everybody, and thank you so much for having me here, Nidhi. I thought the video, what Kevin was talking about, that was completely, on the spot about a lot of things about how depression is supposed to look. And I think he brought up a very important point, because I think all of us have a particular idea about what depression is supposed to look like, which is that, somebody is sad, somebody is crying. I mean, there's a very typical image that often comes to mind. And what I've realized in the years of practice is that, depression really doesn't have one particular face. If anything, absolutely anybody could be depressed, right? The person, the most high performing colleague of yours sitting right next to you, who's happily married, who seems to be really successful and seems really sorted, could be struggling with crippling depression. Somebody, maybe, your boss, who's probably screaming and sounds like he has a lot of anger issues, might be struggling with depression. I think depression is, it often manifests in very different ways, and it's also a very gendered experience. One of the things that I've definitely noticed is that people who struggle with emotional, controlling or sort of regulating their emotions, they don't immediately pick it up as, okay, I'm depressed. They see it as, okay, I'm angry. Or, the moment it doesn't conform to a typical idea of what they think depression needs to look like, they're unable to label it as such, or, to really experience it as such. So, yeah, I mean, I think the video really addressed a lot of that, about how it's possible to really have everything in life, and still be depressed, and at the same time how, it's not necessary that what looks on the outside is exactly how you should be feeling on the inside. Yeah.
Thank you, Meghna, for that. So we do get it that, there is somebody who could quote unquote look perfectly healthy, perfectly normal, perfectly happy, perfectly successful, whatever that looks like. There is no face of depression. There's no symptom. Like you can't say that, oh, this person showing symptoms of depression, right? Like it's not, it's not you start coughing. It's not physical that your temperature will go up. It's not really all of that.
Yeah.
So how does one even, and this whole idea of sadness and depression, I understand that you could be happy and depression could be enveloping anybody, but can sadness also lead, like, where is that? Is there such a strong line between the two? Is there a fine line? How does one even recognize? Because I think the whole idea starts from self-awareness, maybe, of like, I understand that I have depression. How would I seek help if I or know whether I want to seek help or not?
Yeah. Right. I think with sadness, a lot of times it's very situation specific, which is that, there may be an event or an experience that kind of makes you sad. So it could be something like, not being, sort of missing out on a very important event. It could even be a breakup, right? There is a clear event and that makes you sad. And that's completely normal, right? You may be sad for maybe a couple of hours, maybe a few days, maybe even a week. But it's something, it's a feeling, but it's not going to completely throw you off track. It won't completely derail you. You're still able to get through your day-to-day activities. You're probably even able to have fun a lot of times, and eventually once the situation itself resolves itself, and let's say that the breakup is resolved, or you're able to finally get on the phone with a friend that you haven't been able to speak to for a really long time, then the sadness also goes. Depression, on the other hand, doesn't necessarily need to have a trigger event. In the sense that something, you don't necessarily need to have a reason to be depressed, and it affects not just your mood, it also affects how you think, it also affects how you behave, right? It's kind of like an all pervasive experience. It also has a very strong neurobiological basis, and I mean to say that it is very severe. It affects how you live your day-to-day life. It affects how you do really simple things like are you eating, are you sleeping, are you able to go out and meet people, from the most basic of activities to the most to the bigger ones. It affects everything, right? And I think that's kind of like the differentiating line between sadness and depression. Sadness is not as all pervasive as depression is. Depression can be very crippling, and in the most severe form, it might also make you think about life as being meaningless, as not having much hope, of despair that nothing is going to work itself out. um, yeah, and that in the most extreme form might lead to people considering harming themselves. So yeah, that's sort of like an
Right,
overview of how sadness is different from depression.
right, Meghna. Um, it's just, it's also very interesting because when I link disability with it, it
Mm,
becomes so much more complex. I'm sorry.
yes.
It also becomes, it's everything mixed together, right? You may start with sadness, you may go into depression, you may somewhere live with anxiety
Sure.
or some spectrum of mental health
Right. Right.
disorder. You don't know, and it's very hard to determine because there's this constant, the environment is of barriers and negativities. So it's these constant voices of you will not be able to do anything, you're not worth it, you're not, this sort of environment that we live in. So very often, a lot of shift in the whole thinking, like you're saying, in
Yeah.
the whole approach in how you perceive yourself,
Yes.
totally shifts because of the not the disability, but really the reactions to the disability or the response or the discriminations and the issues arising out of those. So it becomes even more challenging because everybody, or many people who live with a disability, start blaming the disability. They're like, oh, we feel this way because we're blind, or we feel this way because we can't walk or
Yeah.
can't hear. And
Yeah.
so it becomes very interesting because it's disability, mental health,
Yes.
sadness, depression, anxiety. It becomes such a complex mix of everything. But from there, I'd like to go to one thing which is sort of common with in all of these realms or spectrums, if we are speaking about, is
Yeah.
stigma. And
Right.
somebody's also, Shikha has asked this question about stigma, external and self stigma.
Sure.
I'm just sort of summarizing Shikha's question. So she says, there's a lot of stigma outside, and how do you even view that? And what about self stigma that you continuously keep blaming yourself around? So first you're depressed, and then you have the self stigma, or you may have the self stigma, and so you may not identify that you're depressed. So can you just speak to stigma a little bit more?
Right. I mean, I think you know I, the stigma around mental health, I mean, to put it in the most mild way possible, it's very real, right? I mean, I think maybe now with so many conversations around it, there is clearly, at least people know that, here is something that exists and this is a problem. But it doesn't, and I think nowadays people are able to even express what they're feeling in more public platforms, and there is a lot of openness around it. But I think, as Shikha mentioned, there is a difference between stigma in society as well as internalized stigma, right? So typically, to kind of run you through what I heard, usually in practice, it could be something as small as people noticing that when family members are talking about mental illnesses, it's that their voice drops, right? They may be happy talking in a very loud voice about, say, cancer or like a fracture, but the moment they're talking about mental illness, their voice has kind of become a whisper that, oh, so and so broke his leg, but then, oh, so and so also has depression. So that sort of voice modulation, that is like one very subtle way of stigma being in practice, and a lot of people internalizing it that, this is something that's shameful and needs to be hidden. Um, and other things like, it's possible that you completely yeah. And I think it's not enough for us to just be like, okay, it's, I think, acceptance and familiarity with mental health conditions is often not enough to challenge whatever internalized stigma you may have. Because I have noticed that a lot of people who are very comfortable discussing mental illnesses, are able to talk about other people's experiences, are very open, also are people who often struggle to, tell their bosses at work that, hey, I can't come in because I'm just not up to it, or, I'm depressed and hence I can't come into work today. So there is a difference between being able to talk about it, being aware about it, and being able to truly accept it and then live your life authentically to sort of reflect that. So yeah, I mean, I think internalized stigma is something that requires years of unlearning and years of having to practice it, to really be able to come to that point where we're able to, have our feelings match with what we are speaking out in the social world.
I think that's a really important point, and I think internalized stigma is just with any disability, it's such a common conversation that we have, Meghna, because it's like I'm saying, this whole concept of what we can do, cannot do, what we're capable of, how bad we are or not. I think it becomes more the whole internalized stigma that you're not going to be an equal contributor, you're not going to be an equal citizen, you're not going to be an equal partner, your life is not worth others. Every conversation goes and gets, and we do work around challenging internalized stigma, really thinking through that, and particularly in the realms of relationships, sexuality, all of that. And it's just such a long and tough process. And so thank you for raising that and bringing that to the table. I think Swati has a couple of comments. Shikha's thanking you for responding to her questions, and particularly about the unlearning bit. And if I could request Srinidhi, please, to read some of the comments by Swati, and then I had another question for you, Meghna.
Yeah. I think the one comment that's there is somehow people's view of my life affects me and triggers me. How to cope with this as a disabled person? Don't mind my constant very first conversation. Feels so liberating. I think there's another comment about self-stigmatization. There's a question from Shikha. It says, do you think stigma is a concept that could...
That we answered, Shri. The stigma, I took both questions from Shikha.
Yeah. Then just this question from Swati.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Srinidhi. Just around Swati's question, Meghna, if you had any response, that would be great.
I mean, I think, one of the challenges is when other people force their narratives on us. That's always really hard because, that can feel like you're being silenced. And, I think as people, we feel very protective of our own stories and our own narratives. And, feeling very frustrated and angry about it, or, feeling affected by it, or even being triggered by it is a very normal, okay response. It's expected, right? And you're completely within your rights to let them know that this is not something that's really welcoming, that's not really welcome for you. And I also understand, though, that can be a very exhausting process because it can make you feel really alone. And I think one of the ways in which we could perhaps strengthen our own voice, and I think perhaps also not be very triggered, is perhaps also trying to look at how much of this is really in our control and how much of this is not. Unfortunately, mental health, is a very systemic issue. It's not just about how are we as individuals coping with this, or how as we as individuals are, how are we responding to it. I think it's when you're existing within a system that is not very friendly to your lived reality, then that can be really difficult. So one of the things that I find often helps people is that when they find other people who are able to empathize or have lived realities that are similar to theirs, right? So maybe finding a group of people, um, and that could be like a start, because I think this is a very isolating experience, and finding an organization or a space where you are welcomed and where people are understanding and empathetic is a good place to start with. Yeah. I'm sorry, there's a lot more, but I think this is a conversation that we could have later if that's something that might be helpful for you.
No, that's great. Thank you for starting off this conversation, Meghna. I actually wanted to come to something that we're currently, Resh also touched upon it, linking mental health and the current situation that we are in. And for you, I actually wanted to ask, we're all facing this kind of collective grief, right? Or
Yeah.
anxiety or fear or stress. And these are not quote unquote normal situations. Whatever our lives were, they're not the same. And it's
Yeah.
been, in many parts, it's been over 4 weeks, or it's a different space. And we're all veering towards sort of this whole thing about grief, anxiety,
Yeah.
restlessness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Frustrations are going high. It's also people are facing violence within homes.
Yeah.
It could be a lot of aggravating situations. It could be unsafe situations for people. It could be aggravating for many people. I feel like everybody cooped up in houses are also getting more and more frustrated and having sort of a not routine and unpleasant conversations with each other. So it's just a whole space where all of us are not maybe behaving or feeling like ourselves.
Yeah.
Just in this space as a therapist, if you had some sort of suggestions for the larger, not just mental health, but just mental well-being, right?
Yeah.
For all of us, that will be really helpful.
Right. Thank you so much for bringing up that question, because those seem to be the conversations that we've all been having recently. Right. So I think what the whole lockdown and the quarantine has been doing to us is, I think for the first time, we know what it's like to live in this sort of alternate reality where your feelings on the matter don't really count, right? Like it's complete suspension of our needs, our ability to move, basic control. And I think as human beings, we're very wired to want control over our lives and our own situations. And this lockdown is, just come to this point where it's suspended the very sense of safety and, this feeling of control that is very integral to our sense of well-being, right? If you look at yeah, so to address the question about what are the things that we need to be doing, one of the first steps is for us to know that whatever we are feeling in the situation is perfectly valid and perfectly normal. I think when the situation first started, a lot of us didn't anticipate that it would go on for as long as it has. And I don't think any of us were really born in this situation to, like, we didn't have a playbook, right? None of us knew how to handle this. This has been very unprecedented. So it's fine if the first couple of weeks have been a struggle. It's okay even if it's a struggle now. One of the things that would really help is if you have a routine. The first thing that usually gets affected when you're feeling anxious is your sleep, your appetite, your ability to really on a day-to-day basis, because a lot of us like going out, or a lot of us are very social or like talking to people. A lot of those avenues have kind of closed in ways that we are generally used to. So now would be a time for us to sort of adapt, after making sure that we have like a routine together. So maybe talking more to people. I know we've been calling this social distancing, but really this is more of physical distancing, right? I mean, we need people to lean on at this point. We need emotional support. We need have people around us to feel like we're not going, we're not really struggling with this and we're all alone. Another thing is to take breaks, as many breaks as possible. It's fine if your productivity is dropping. I think it's important that if you're working, to let your manager know that it's fine, that you're not doing too well. So maybe these are plans that you can expect. I think if there is a larger issue about, how much is clearly expected from you in terms of, professionally and personally, then it's important to demarcate those expectations with family members as well as at the workplace, as well as with friends. And it's okay to take time off. And, yes, please basically make, try to figure out routines, try to make sure that you're trial and erroring through this. And you will find something that works for you. Of course, please speak to therapists, or anybody, any social worker, anybody in the space who might be able to guide you better, because you might have more specific concerns. I know we've been speaking a lot about depression, and I think a lot of our understanding of depression also comes from the diagnostic statistical manual of mental disorders, and that very clearly classifies and demarcates what different mental illnesses need to look like. But I also want to say that, as Nidhi, you've also mentioned, this is a spectrum, and it's possible that you're feeling sad, you're feeling anxious, you're feeling despair, and a whole bunch of emotions, and all of these are perfectly normal and expected emotions for the present situation.
Thank you so much. I think real solid suggestions, and I think what I keep telling my team, and I'm probably been the worst in keeping in touch with everyone during this lockdown, because I think just a sense of, and I'm sharing this because it's really interesting, because I am generally a people's person. But the
Right.
whole situation where everyone's become so over digital,
Hmm.
and suddenly everyone's connecting digitally because that's the way you connect. So if you see, if there were on an average in every field about 6 webinars in a week, there are about 36 or 52 professionally. If you're talking about connecting with friends, once in the friends you connected with in once in 2 months, or you could give X hours to family. It's just the not just the expectation, but the whole engagement. Everyone's engagement and expectation has increased. So really, it is tough to set boundaries. It is tough, and considering that all of us are in lockdown, we're also sort of struggling with basic necessities. We're also struggling with sort of just the change situation, right? And many of us experience like this lack of enthusiasm, maybe, or just the memory response is not the same, etc. So I think it's really helpful, Meghna, that you share with us about demarcation. Often communication of demarcation is very important, but also sometimes um, sometimes basically the demarcation, two people, if they wanted to talk between friends, between colleagues, the demarcation may not go to the other person or may not be respected, and that's when the issues begin. And I think that's again something that we all will deal with and are continuing to deal with. But I also want to say to a lot of people out there, from my own experience of the lockdown, that I don't think we should take it as a pressure to over communicate. Um, like Meghna said, let's not take it as the other extreme of social distancing means social isolation. It's physical distancing. It's not isolation. So let's not, let's try and stay connected. But also, these are very pressurizing times. So I don't think you should go to the other end of, just from my experience of coping, I don't think if there's any need of going to the other end of getting into a FOMO kind of a space where you have the fear of missing out, or others have the fear of missing out. So everyone's connecting every day, every week, things that you would just not do because of this whole reaction to, oh, we are isolated, let's not feel that way. So there's also that extreme that's happening right now, where everyone's feeling like, oh my God, they will miss out, they are missing out. We like to have control, like you rightly said. So really grateful that you brought out those points. Shanadi, can I please request you to read a couple of questions that have come from
Many.
yeah, and then we we do have about anyway. We'll start with the questions, and uh, Meghna, please tell us if you'd like to club 3-4 questions and then
Right.
respond.
Yeah. I think Anusha has asked about what is the permitted timeline of trial and error. Um, I think about setting routine. She said, what is permitted timeline of trial and error, as some have different time frame to cope, as there is some people do take longer than others. Is there any way to set range or gauge? I think the moment we start trying to figure out, is there a moment or is there like a range, then I think then we're also trying to force fit our experiences into how other people might be experiencing this lockdown. And I think sometimes that might mean that we have expectations of ourselves that might not work for ourselves. So my suggestion would be that, there is no such thing as a proper timeline or like a recommended timeline. Routines are very evolving, which means that maybe for the first 2 weeks, there is a certain routine that's working for you, but you might find that on the third week or the fourth week, it's not working. So, routines can evolve as well. And you just kind of figure it out as in how it goes, and it's fine if it's not working, because that means you can just make changes. But no, there is no such prescribed range that is appropriate or that is considered healthy. Yeah. So I think there's another question. I think
I
somebody
think there are a
asked.
couple of more by Anisha. I think she sent about 5-6 questions, if I'm not
Okay.
wrong.
Okay. I think somebody asked. I think Ahuti asked about what are your views about medication for depression. Right. So about medication for depression. So, again, I think the way people experience depression is different. The way people want to cope with depression is different. Some people are comfortable with taking medications, which is great. If you're not comfortable taking medications, it's also perfectly fine, just as long as you're you're accessing help as in when you need it, if you're seeing a therapist. And I think this is a conversation you can have with your therapist or with your psychiatrist about how you would want. I mean, you have complete control over this, right? I mean, the Mental Health Care Act bill as well. It follows a right-based approach, and it allows you to have a lot of say in how you want to treat your condition, which may be depression or anxiety or anything else. So if you want to take medication and you feel like it's severe and you might benefit from it, then I think go for it. If you feel like you want to avoid it and you want to depend on counseling and therapy more, then that's also perfectly fine. This is really depends on you and what you want. Yeah. I hope that answers your question, Ahuti. And I think she's also asked, so Ahuti says, I have also come across many non-authentic articles in newspaper supplements and sometimes by so-called spiritual practitioners, adding more stigma and taboo to depression and society's perception. And society's perception is also formed largely how depression is represented in media. Would you like to have your views on this? I mean, I think any one of the things I want to say is that I think different things work for different people. Some people feel alternative methods of healing is something that works for them. So you have something like energy healing and different modalities of it, and if it works for you, again, it's great. But generally, I recommend evidence-based practices and things that have been proven to work. So my recommendation is to then again maybe speak to a professional, a mental health professional, and see what works for you. I think it's really unfortunate that during this time there's a lot of fake news or unscientific news that's floating around. It definitely needs to be corrected. I guess one of the things we could do is kind of verify if the sources from which we obtain our news is is sort of maintains a certain quality and is fact based. So I think that's the most that we can do. But yes, it is unfortunate that this is something that's very prevalent. And I think at an individual level, the best we can do is address it in our families and in our social circles and let them know that this is not right. And then in turn, provide them resources that will guide them in the right direction. Yeah. Yes, Nidhi, are there more questions? Yes.
I think there's one more question around the treatment I don't know if you have a certain response to it, the treatment of people with mental illness in jails,
Okay.
and the way responses. So I think, Srinidhi, if you can read those two questions.
So
I
I have
am
mental illness diagnosis under IDEA scale that I have severe mental illness in the range of 71 to 99%. Police officials, judicial magistrate, jail authorities, judges are viewing facts of any case involving persons like me with mental illness.
without considering the view of how I, as a person with mental illness, behaves, and I take decision in those circumstances. In jails, mental illness are treated in punishment model. What can be done about that?
Right. So I think it's I'm not. I mean, I don't think I'm informed enough about the modalities that are undertaken in prisons as to how this is dealt with. But yeah, I mean, I think there are. Okay. Yes, I think with medications, I think a psychiatrist would be a better person to speak to about that, because that is not my domain. I'm a psychologist, and we don't generally work with, I mean, we don't prescribe medications.
Would it be okay if I answered, not as an answer, but just to make a statement?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's okay.
I mean, I think this goes back to what Val was saying, what Resh was saying earlier, about this idea that people with psychosocial disabilities are reduced to their illness, and there is no other way of approaching them. So maybe Resh would have some answer to it in that sense, or she could reply with how it works, or what has she seen in her experience, because I thought that would be useful. And I think that the idea that medication is that people with mental illnesses cannot take decisions is something we discussed earlier in the call about agency as well as autonomy of people who live with psychosocial disabilities. So, Resh, would you want to talk, or is that enough?
Just a second, I'm connecting my speaker again.
We can hear you.
Yeah, but my cat might wake up and meow, so I needed to just connect the speaker. So this is Muruganandam's question, right? Yes. So here's a difficult thing, because we are talking about how criminalization in the institution is looked upon. And then we also are looking at how the mental health care acts right now. It's added to the issue. So I would suggest, that you might have to actually get in touch with a psychiatrist in your local government, because the ideas scale is actually a new thing the government of India. I'm sorry, that's some background noise. Else's knowledge, the IDEA scale is actually the Indian Disability Evaluation and Assessment Scale. We've had this earlier, where there was a discussion on how do you assess how disabling a psychosocial disability can actually be. Because on one day, somebody with schizophrenia can be at 80% disabled in a way, and on another day we can be completely fine. So this is how, I mean, for those who don't know, that's what the IDEA scale actually is about. When you're talking about punishment in the where mental illness in jails look like, this really requires a whole bunch of people who are working around it. So like I said, I would suggest that you will have to get in touch with somebody in your local government. You can also get in touch by the working group for mental health right now to the government of India. This includes several of well-known Indian mental health activists, from Ratnaboli Ray, Vandana Gopikumar, and a bunch of other psychiatrists who are actually really working on this area. How to work with people within jails who have mental illness, and then the other component of it at the same time. I hope that answers that part of it.
And just to add to what Meghna and Resh were saying, I just want to also say, Muruganandan, that it'll be lovely if you, some of these could, around reasonable accommodation, around assessment within law, would be a fantastic conversation to have with a lawyer and a lawyer that works specifically for disability rights, has a good understanding of the two laws on mental health and rights of persons with disabilities, and the framework within prisons. So that would be a specialized and an individualized conversation. But thank you for raising
Yeah.
important issues and complex pieces of conversation. I wanted to actually thank, now that Resh is also back talking to us, it's a lovely moment. We're actually at 5:15, and we'd like to thank Resh and Meghna both. Like I already said this to Resh, but Meghna, I think so many things that you were saying, and I'm sure people have more questions, and we would have loved to continue the conversations with you. But thank you for bringing your perspective. Thank you so much for just sharing, some basic tips for broadening our understanding. Both of you, we really, really thank you again, our entire team at Rising Flame and people here. We want to thank you for sharing your thoughts, for helping us build a little more of empathy, for helping us understand realities even more, for supporting us and connecting with ourselves and other stories in a better way. So thank you very much, and thank you for being on Vellapanti. It's also very special for us because this is the last and the final session of Vellapanti. We'd started it as an effort. As soon as the lockdown kicked in, we wanted to stay connected, continue building empathy, understand, hearing from each other, and listening to each other. And we wanted to continue that practice and not feel the isolation in this physical distancing period. And so we are here at the end of 4 Saturdays, 4 weeks, 4 house parties or gatherings under the banner of Vellapanti by Rising Flame. You can, those who have missed earlier sessions, we had some fantastic speakers, we had some book readings, we had some screenings, we had some podcasts, and some interesting discussions and churchas. You will find videos of the previous sessions on our website, www.risingflame.org. You could write to us with any feedback, any suggestion, any requests on our email ID, team@risingflame.org, or you could connect with us. Or anyway, please connect with us or follow our work through Facebook and through Twitter at Rising Flame Now, and on Facebook, just Rising Flame Now, NOW. Thank you once again, everyone. Thank you to our sign language interpreter who stuck with us through the 4 weeks in making this call even more accessible. Our editor, Preeti, who does magic with the video recordings that we have now, and we put them on YouTube. So thank you. A big thanks to Preeti as well. And of course, to the entire team, Arjita, Chanika, Srinidhi. Thank you very much. And all the people who've heard us, who stuck with us, and who would want to continue these conversations in one form or the other. We'd really like to express our deep gratitude and appreciation, and a lot of love for connecting with us, for joining Vellapanti, our house parties for people with disabilities in these difficult times. And we will emerge out of this. We need to have faith, and we all can take this space of self-reflection, of a pause, of drawing boundaries, of making the schedules and frameworks that work for us. Thank you, take care, and stay
Thank you,
connected.
Nidhi.
Thank you, Nidhi.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for watching. Please do like, share, and subscribe, and click the bell button for updates. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, or visit our website to know more about our work. Links in the description.